Hey YouTube, Rico Knows here. So I start my day every morning quite the same. I make a bunch of videos for TikTok and YouTube, and then I go through Twitter and I try to find things, and people started tagging me on this and sending it to me in my DMs, and it was On3 put out their rankings for the best teams in the Big 10, right? And it says via Jesse Simonton. He's some writer for On3. And he put out this top 18 list, and rankings are subjective. I got no problem with rankings. You do your rankings, I'll do mine, and we know who's going to be right. Fair? But people see these types of posts, right? 148,000 people have seen this post, and they think it's like a fact. Like, they'll come to the comments and they'll start writing, and they'll be like, well, we got the number 1 ranked team, or we got the number 2 ranked team, and it's some dude's opinion, bro. And he ain't superhuman. He's just a regular ass person. And he doesn't actually know the teams at all. He doesn't know the teams at all. So when we look at these rankings, the most glaring thing, the most egregious thing here, okay, there's 2 of them, but the most egregious is Indiana at 18. Indiana being the worst team in the Big 10 is just, I don't want to say ignorant, but uninformed. Uninformed is the word. All right, let's talk about it. So first, if you go to this article, remember, there's posts like this, and everybody reads the posts like this. But you got to go to the link and actually read the article. It's important that you guys don't just read the headline and then think you know what's going on, because this is terrible. And you got to try to figure out how this man got here. So if you go click on the link, it'll have it here, and what you'll notice is a very refined approach to what he's saying about each team, because he knows a lot about the teams at the top, and then as we go down, he knows less and less about each team, okay? So we start with Ohio State, number 1 team in the Big 10, no one's going to argue with that. You can't debate it. It's subjective, I get it. But they got Caleb Downs, and look at the key names he puts in the chat. Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, just big name guys that you might have heard of, because that's all he's ever heard of. This is a dude who watches TV. I promise you, this guy doesn't know the teams. Not at all. And then we go to quarterbacks, and he says, okay, there's Will Howard, there's Devin Brown and Julian Sain. I'm not going to say anything, but you're missing a quarterback. It's okay. That's fine. Number 2, Oregon. Once again, just listing off 3 guys. And Jabbar Muhammad is not the best corner transfer they have. That's your business. You say it. They got Evan Stewart from, I heard all these guys are great with a bunch of stars. Oh, look who they lost, a bunch of stars. Or look who they gained. It really doesn't move me when they do this like wave top mentioning of certain players. This one's kind of embarrassing. Ricky Johnson leaving UNLV. Ricky Johnson's had like 30 tackles in a season, the most he's ever had in a season. Ricky Johnson is not worth mentioning, but the fact that he's leaving UNLV and going to Michigan, you mention him, like, this isn't it, man. This isn't the move right here. The bigger issue is losing Keon Sabb, right? But we'll leave that alone. That one just kind of, I don't know what's going on. Now we're at Penn State. Once again, just kind of listing off star players, what they're going to do, where they're going to go. I'm not mad at you. And then Nebraska at 5 is laughable. Putting Nebraska at 5 in the Big 10, this is embarrassing almost. This is embarrassing. To think that they're better than Iowa, USC, Rutgers doesn't belong up here, but like Wisconsin, like it's not real. Okay, Nebraska has a true freshman starting quarterback. Who's the last true freshman starting quarterback you've seen dominate? Jameis Winston? Who? I'll wait. So now you're assuming that they got something going here. And transfer portal departures, well, they just had real attrition with injuries and grades, if you will. Iowa getting Brendan Sullivan. All of a sudden, he's talking about Brendan Sullivan, Northwestern quarterback. That's a doozy. That one kind of threw me off. Like, yo, what are we talking about? Iowa. USC says they didn't address their offensive line and defensive line. I would imagine USC's offensive line was addressed last year. They just weren't ready to start. And I'm talking about transfers coming in from Wyoming. I'm talking about just kind of continuity over the season. But we'll leave it alone. We'll leave it. I won't even get mad. We're going to go. We're just going to chill. We go to Rutgers. They mention one guy, Ethan Caliac-Manis, winning the starting job, and then tells you Gavin Wimsatt left to Kentucky. Do you know that Rutgers is bringing in a superstar wide receiver? Do you know that Rutgers has answers everywhere? Like, I don't know. Maybe I just know the teams too well. Maybe I don't get moved by this type of shit. Washington, Kalen DeBoer's departure to Alabama. The Huskies roster amassed significant attrition, particularly across the offensive line, secondary, and receiving corps. Okay, so let's be real. Did Washington lose a ton of players in the receiving corps because of the departure of Kalen DeBoer? No. Kalen DeBoer left. They only lost one wide receiver, Jeremy Bernard. They lost 3 wide receivers to the NFL draft. That had nothing to do with losing Kalen DeBoer. So that doesn't even make sense. After his departure, they lost attrition in these 3 places, and it's just not true. They lost them before he ever left. It's weird, man. I don't know. I don't know what these guys are doing. He says Jed Fish rated his own former Arizona roster. For more than a dozen transfers. Well, that's not true. They got a dozen transfers, not more than a dozen. If they got more than a dozen, that's news to me, because I'm counting 12. Okay, so not more than a dozen. And half of them, 6 of them, have never played at Arizona. And I'm not talking about because they were on the bench. I'm talking about they never walked out of the fucking zoo. They never came out of the tunnel for Arizona. 6 of them. 5 of the guys that transferred from Arizona to Washington were 2024 recruiting signees. And then one of them was Shaw, who came over from Indiana, never played a down for Arizona. He came over from Indiana in the winter and then just followed the coaching staff in the spring. Half those transfers, they didn't raid the roster. Go look at the starting lineups for Arizona last year and then look at this year. There's no rating of the roster. This is actually some of the least amount of transfers I've seen from a head coach who moved. From a head coach who moved from one school to another and bring nearly that many guys as they should. There was no rating of the roster by Jed Fish. He didn't do it. Wisconsin, I think it's absurd. I think it's disgusting. They don't talk about Jaheim showing up from Arkansas. You lead an SEC team in tackles, and we don't talk about it. Jaheim Thomas, former Cincinnati linebacker. We don't talk about it. John Pius, we don't talk about it by name. He just said a trio of newcomers at linebacker. A trio, because they got to talk about Tackett Curtis. They got to mention a guy with recruiting stars, because that's got to be the biggest transfer, and it's not. They just don't know the teams. They got a bunch of great wide receivers, don't know the teams. They don't know what's going on. They just look at, he's just skimming, bro. Aiden Childs and Jack Bailey. Yeah, both good transfers for Michigan State. They brought a lot more players. Illinois, I don't know how they're at 12. Subjective, argumentative. Don't know how they're at 12. There's just nothing there for me. Maryland at 13, MJ Morris. First time they have a new starting quarterback in 5 seasons. Okay. Full-time starting quarterback. I mean, they had a new starter in the bowl game, if you ask me. I don't know what's going on here. It's cool. Let's get to the juice. We'll leave it all alone. These rankings here are ridiculous. I won't even get into it. Let's go. Oh, by the way, Kyle Ford was never a potential starting wide receiver at UCLA. It says likely starters. Kyle Ford was never a likely starter. The fact that Kyle Ford transferred back to USC does not make him good. He's never been good anywhere he's gone. Should never transfer back to USC. He's tripping, to quote him. Minnesota, they get a 1,000-yard rusher in the transfer portal. You don't even mention him. 1,000-yard. Instead, you want to mention a guy like this, Tyler Williams from Georgia, a 4-star guy who didn't pan out at Georgia after 1 season. That's what you mentioned. You mentioned guys who've never played before. But a 1,000-yard rusher, a team's leading rusher, 2 years now, Saban Gora shows up, nothing. Wild. Was it Marcus Majors also showed up, running back from Oklahoma? Nothing. We don't even talk about it. I don't know. You do this for a living, right? I do this for a living. I call you boys out for a living. Let's talk about it. Purdue, probably going to have a rough season. Love what they're doing. Indiana. Oh, my God, 18. Indiana. Indiana's at 18. This guy ranked him at 18. Let's see what he says. New head coach Kirk Cignetti brought over a slew of players from JMU. Slew. Didn't bother to count them. He didn't raid his former roster. He just brought over a slew of guys. Remember, Jedd Fisch raided the roster and got 12. He also nabbed Ohio transfer quarterback Curtis Rourke to battle with sophomore quarterback Brennan Sorsby for the quarterback number 1 job. Guys, this is categorically false. This is not true. All right? Brennan Sorsby left in the transfer portal about early December. I want to say December 4th, 5th, 6th, somewhere around there. And then Curtis Rourke committed 23rd, 14th, a couple weeks later to Indiana. They were never going to compete with each other. Curtis Rourke was the replacement for Sorsby leaving to Cincinnati. So this guy doesn't even know that. He puts it in an article and says they're competing for the starting job. That means he didn't watch spring games. He hasn't read a damn thing. He hasn't fact-checked anything. And whoever QA/QCs his shit, whoever does the quality control, quality assurance, the copy editors, the sports editor, if there's any editors, I don't know. I used to be a writer at a newspaper. If I wrote anything, it went to my copy editor. And for my copy editor, it went to the sports editor. And before it went there, then it'd go to print, and then it'd go to checkers. We would print off a version of the newspaper at midnight. And the newspapers that went the furthest away were all those checkers with all those errors. And we would be proofreading it, checking it, looking at it, fact-checking it, everything. Everybody gets to look at a checker, find the errors, fix them. Then it goes back to reprint. And that's why you'll get a newspaper full of errors. And you'll be like, how does this paper stay in business? Look at all these typos. Look at all these errors. Oh, you live really far from the plant. You live really far from the factory. Because if you live right next to where we print the paper and where we write it, there's no errors. So I want to know, where is the proofreading going on here? Brennan Sorsby has not been in Indiana for months. Who's proofreading your shit? Where's the error-free version of this story? Because that's wild. Justification for putting him at 18. Next, it says, Cignetti has won everywhere he's been. There's no doubt Indiana should be more optimistic about its prospects from the former Elon and JMU head coach in charge. Cool. But despite Cignetti's confidence, he took over a team in dire shape, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, last in the Big Ten in 2023. By the way, missing the other end of this parenthesis, this is what I'm talking about. These are errors right here. This is an error. Just straight up on an actual website that all you guys believe. A major website you believe. But let's talk about it because they have all these great, they have all these great transfers that nobody knows about. So you talk about a terrible defense at Indiana. And for me, that just doesn't sound right. And it's unfortunate because I thought I posted this. Give me a second here. Could have sworn I posted it. Oh, guess what? I don't know if he deleted it, took it down. We'll see what happens. I got it. I got these boys picked. Let's go. So let's go look at Indiana's gains in the transfer portal. Now, if you're an MVP, you know how I feel about Indiana. This is the 18th best team in the Big Ten, according to Jesse Simpson and On3. Yeah, you notice I ain't following this dude. Never in a million years. I don't need to read his shit. This was brought to my attention. Rico, can you tell me why you're so high on Indiana and everybody has them ranked dead last? Yeah, their defense right here. Who have they gained in the transfer portal? Their defense is terrible, you said. That's fine. Coach knew that. Who did he get? Have we addressed every position group? Let's start with defensive linemen. CJ West coming over from Kent State. Everybody wanted him. 2-year starter, 3-year starter. Complete stud. Tyreek Tucker coming over from JMU. He's 6 foot, 300 pounds. You think coaches don't know what they got? He was in the rotation last year on an amazing JMU defensive line. Amazing JMU defensive line. Oh, by the way, that defensive line, James Carpenter was a starter on it. Go watch the film. Kamara, 7.5 sacks at JMU last year. That's all defensive line additions. Let's go look at them linebackers. We have Logan. Najee Logan, second on UMass in tackles. You go to UMass, go look at their team, second on the team in tackles, showing up to Indiana. Jalen Walker, second at JMU in tackles. Knows the coaching staff, continuity. They already know what he can do. This is a 0-star kid coming out of high school because On3 gave him 0 stars. 24/7 Sports gave him 0 stars. You don't know these kids. You never watched them play. Aiden Fisher, the next year, 0 stars. 2022, 0-star player. That's why JMU's recruiting classes are ranked in the top 150, 140. You guys just shit on them. Don't even evaluate the players. Led JMU in tackles. You're still worried about this defense. They brought in 3 linebackers capable of leading entire teams in tackles. Defensive back. Just added some depth just the other day. DJ Warno. Oh, by the way, he's from Arizona. They raided Arizona's roster. Former UCLA, Arizona defensive back, 6'3", and he's just depth. D'Angelo Pons, freshman All-American from JMU. Cedric Doss, FCS, PFF, All-American. Shout out to Austin P. Sean Osbury, 95 tackles last year at ODU. Old Dominion had 2 safeties leading them in tackles. Terry Jones at 104 and Osbury at 95. So we think very highly of ODU linebackers, right? Wayne Matthews gets to Michigan State. Everybody talks about it. Oh, my God, blah, blah, blah. Well, here we go. ODU defensive backs. I'm looking at an entire starting defense. That's a starting 11 right there. We don't even know what Indiana was returning. I do. You don't know. I fucking know. Your friends don't know, but Rico knows. The disgust I have for these websites that people think are actual, like they think they're facts. They think they know the players and the teams, and you don't know shit. You sit around and name 1 or 2 guys on every team and just kind of skim off the top and be like, yeah, that guy's good there, that guy's good there, and they're not. Never in my life have I seen people anointed, identified as being subject matter experts in a field, and they literally know nothing. Stop reading that bullshit. Your friends don't know, but Rico knows.